The word underrated is tossed around a lot these days, and in the case of the Spy, it was my belief that none of his knives could ever be truly underrated, simply because they all share the same fundamental and impactful feature of being able to kill an enemy in one hit. You know, provided you have a knife to work with in the first place. In this way, much of the Spy's melee toolkit is functionally the same, and you'd struggle to go wrong when choosing any knife as long as your sneaking skills are sharp enough. It is only when we get down to the fine print of a knife's statistics that we can begin to differentiate the better knives from the worse ones. And sometimes it can take several hours of experience with the weapon to even begin to truly understand its exact mechanics, and the methods one must employ to best put those mechanics to use in a game. All this to say, I'd like to tell you about a specific knife which I've had a personally fluctuating history with, which harkens back to when I first started playing TF2. A knife with a lesser known story, mostly due to its underdog status as a weapon, which I nonetheless find very interesting if nothing else for its underdog status in the first place. A knife which may in fact deserve the title of underrated. Your Eternal Reward is a community-created knife that was added to the game in 2010. Although it has seen large tweaks and changes since it was added, it has always remained functionally identical to the Wanga Prick, which is essentially a reskin added a year after the YER, or YER. Just rolls off the tongue. Like all of Spy's knives, the YER retains the backstab function that the Spy is known for, but rather than undisguising when you perform a backstab as you would with other knives, you will instead quickly take on the disguise of the player that you kill. We'll get more into this later, but first I want to talk about what is, in my opinion, the actual best feature of the Your Eternal Reward, the fact that it is a silent killer. What this essentially means is that your targets will make no scream of pain or any sound at all when you kill them, and that the sound of your strike is generally made, well, silent. But how silent? How silent is this silent kill? Because although the tooltip may say no attack noise from backstabs, there is still a sound made, both to the Spy and any nearby players. And whilst it is nowhere near as audibly intrusive as the sonically stentorian screams of a subdued soldier, it will still be recognizable to more experienced players. This is where I think the Eternal Reward could be changed, make the backstab sound itself completely silent, along with the screams. Maybe provide a client-side sound to the Spy in order to provide some feedback, but I don't see any reason why the stab sound should be audible to other players at all, especially when it contradicts both the concept and the actual written description of the weapon in the first place. With that being said, I still regard the silent kill aspect of the Eternal Reward as its best feature, largely because of how much more it unlocks for the Spy to be able to get away with. Take this clip, for example. We can see that I bump into this pyro here, and he becomes rightfully paranoid. Now, a target like that is certainly tricky to get a stab on, so instead I shift my focus onto these demo men. With the safety of the Eternal Reward silent kill, I know that I can get the stabs without the pyro being able to hear a thing, and even get the pyro himself. Whilst he may have been waiting to hear the sound of his teammates screaming, alerting him to my presence, his ear would not have been clued in to the subtle yet still audible sound of the stab. So while the Eternal Reward may not be entirely silent, the noise that it does make is near negligible, and this effect happens almost every time you stab. Provided the enemy isn't looking in your direction when you go for a kill, you can get away with almost anything. As a Spy, you can, theoretically, always control when the enemy does and doesn't see you go for a stab, since their field of view can only be so large at a given moment. What you generally can't control is the sound of your kill, which can be heard from any angle and from a decent distance. The Eternal Reward removes this factor, almost, completely, allowing you to fool anyone who's relying on their vision to catch you out. In these situations which benefit the more traditionalist Spy, the Eternal Reward can be seen as a straight upgrade to the stock knife. Paired along with the silent kill comes the lesser known feature that your stabs are no longer seen in the kill feed to the enemy team, which, while it can lead to genuinely noticeable performance improvements due to a lowered awareness of your existence, is still secondary to the understated power of a silent kill. In some cases, very experienced players will still be able to detect the sound of their heavy's minigun suddenly stop firing, or the sound of their engineer suddenly stop upgrading a building, but the conclusion that they're likely to jump to is probably not the Your Eternal Reward, and that's because no one uses this thing. For whatever reason, the Eurotunnel reward is, and always has been, the least used spy knife. We know this because Valve straight up told us in the Jungle Inferno balance changes back in 2017. And ironically, this serves to amplify its power. As the less used it is, the fewer people know about how it works, and therefore don't look out for it as often or know how to effectively combat it. The weakness of the silent kill, therefore, as is the biggest weakness of spy, is communication. A silent stab is not so silent when your targets alert each other of their deaths through voice chat. In pubs, this is less of a problem, as team coordination, even of this smaller scale, is rare. But does this mean it's not as useful in competitive? Well, sure, but as I say, it's still a knife. It can still backstab, and the time it takes for your enemy to register that they've been stabbed by this thing, an effect they would usually associate with a loud scream from their character, and then communicate that fact with their team, is probably just enough time to get another stab or two. It's why I still ran it in last summer's Seasonalander tournament, and how I was able to get away with this.
I'm going full Call of Duty mode. Never mind, I'm fucking dead.
Oh my god, nice step there. Nice step.
The downside of this is that the knife can feel like somewhat of a crutch for a player's ability to be stealthy. Switching to any other knife after using this thing can often make you feel like you're getting caught out in situations that you shouldn't be. Maybe all of Spy's knives should be silent after all. Overall, the silent kill of the knife is definitely my favourite feature, and makes the Eternal reward an easy pick over the other knives if I'm dealing with a more experienced team. It turns Spy more into what he should be, more stealth-oriented, and more, like a spy. But whilst the silent kill is what I most love about the knife, it is generally considered a secondary effect, alongside what most people would regard as the real meat of the weapon, disguise on kill. This is the one feature that the Eternal reward has retained ever since it was added, and is what sets it apart from the other knives. Whenever you backstab an enemy, their body will quickly disappear under a cloaking effect, and you will take on their form as if you had disguised as them, only without all the smoke that would usually appear when disguising. Paired with the silent kill, this feature is just great. The enemy can turn their head for but a moment, and have no idea that the very real teammate that they just spy checked is now a disguised spy, and that the teammate that was very real is now very dead. It is the ultimate stealth tool. Take this clip, for instance. I'm following behind these players, and I get the stab on the heavy, taking on his disguise. The demo man then turns around, sees me, and suspects nothing, because there's no body, no scream. And the heavy that they just saw firing his gun, something that you can't do as a disguised spy, is exactly where he last left him. Another feature of this disguise on kill thing is that sentry guns cannot detect you when you stab, because you're never technically undisguised. This means that the old stab and sap, the act of stabbing an engineer and then sapping his gun before it has a chance to turn around and shoot you, is easier than ever, and actually works even when there's more than one sentry gun present, whereas with other knives you may get the stab on one engineer, but as you lose your disguise when you attack, the other sentries will make pretty short work of you. When faced with a multi-sentry engineer nest, or even against one competent Engie that stays far enough away from his buildings to make a stab and sap impossible, the Eternal reward is my go-to option, and it absolutely gets the job done. Another subconscious benefit of the Eternal reward is that if you're doing your job well and stabbing a bunch of folks, you will constantly be changing disguise. A lot of spies will often stick to 1 or 2 disguises when using any other knife, partly because pressing 4 than 1 every time takes a lot less mental strain than having to get inside the mind of the enemy and choose a disguise that they're less likely to detect, but also because spy walks slower when disguised as some classes than others. You're far less likely to see a spy disguised as classes like heavy, demo, and soldier just because of how slow they make the spy. And so players are generally less conditioned to spy check those ones because
who would ever disguise as heavy?
With the Eternal reward, not only will you be forced into more unorthodox disguises, leading to a decreased frequency of being spy checked, you won't be sticking to the same disguise or handful of disguises over and over, meaning the enemy physically can't keep track of what you might be disguised as at a given moment. If you disguise as Pyro every time, the more suspicious of Pyros the enemy will be as the game goes on. I think the Eternal reward gives you a bit more long-term survivability in that regard. An eternal reward, so to speak. So, with all the clear benefits that the knife can provide, why then aren't people using it? Why, even after the Jungle Inferno changes, does it continue to rank as the least favourite spy knife time and time again? Well, to answer that, let's go back to the weapon stats and take a look at the downsides. Now, the old downside of the Eternal reward was that you could not disguise without a backstab, no matter what. There was an exploit you could do where you kill-binded holding the knife, switched to a different one, disguised, and then picked up the Eternal reward again to avoid leaving spawn completely naked. But as a whole, you had to backstab in order to disguise. I personally liked this downside. It gave the knife a very all-or-nothing feel. You were more reliant than ever on acting and making the best out of whatever stab you got. We'll talk more about acting with disguises later, but one of the current downsides post-Jungle Inferno is that you can disguise with the knife, but doing so requires and consumes your entire cloak meter. Unless you disguise and spawn. This honestly doesn't come into play all that often, especially when compared to the other downside, but it can be kind of a nuisance. It makes it effectively impossible to use the dead ringer, because before, where I'd recommend waiting for an ammo pack to refill your cloak after your disguise eats it all, you simply can't refill cloak with the dead ringer. And one of the most used benefits of cloaking is that you return to brisk spy walk speed, even when disguised as slower classes. But again, you simply can't do this because the dead ringer doesn't turn you invisible until it's triggered by taking damage. It's still the year eternal reward, and it's still gonna get you kills regardless, but this one downside does restrict your options. Speaking of restricting options, there is this neat trick you can do with the cloak and dagger where disguising while sat under full cloak lets you stay invisible through the disguise change, although I generally advise against using the cloak and dagger with this knife because of the goddamned cloak drain. The other downside of the Your Eternal Reward is that, while you have it equipped, your cloak drains 33% faster. This may not sound like a lot, but it is. Usually I'd enjoy trying out and recommending different loadouts to run with the knife, but because of this godforsaken stat, there's only really one loadout that makes the most out of the weapon. For watches, the dead ringer is pretty much out of the question, as I said before, and the cloak and dagger already has a faster cloak drain rate than stock, which stacks with the eternal rewards. This leaves you with the stock Invis watch, which works well to combat the cloak drain, both due to its longevity compared to the other watches, but also because you can still pick up ammo boxes and destroyed building pieces to refill your cloak meter while you are invisible, which you cannot do with the other watches. And in terms of revolvers, you're again pretty much restricted to only using the L'Étranger, which, with its plus 40% cloak duration, does just about nullify the cloak drain rate from the Eternal Reward. The L'Étranger is also a good pick with this knife because the minus 20% damage penalty doesn't matter as much, as it's generally inadvisable to be firing your gun while using the Eternal Reward anyways, as you lose your disguise while doing so, which are now all the more valuable. This does mean that with this loadout, Razorback snipers are your enemy. You can't stab them because of this thing, and shooting or butter knifing them to death means you're now without a disguise until your cloak meter fills back up, which can leave you exposed for a fatal amount of time, especially if you're already low on cloak, which is not uncommon because of the 33% cloak drain. This may then be a good time to talk about the nightmare scenario for this knife, and the moments that it most struggles in, missing a stab. Unless you're able to pull off a quick trick stab, which may still lead to you being killed after the fact, missing a stab with the Eternal Reward puts you in a situation where you are, boned. Because of the knife's downsides, the cloak drain and the knife needing a full cloak meter to disguise, your escape options once you miss a backstab become extremely limited. You no longer have a disguise, since you just wasted it on a failed backstab attempt. You probably don't have enough cloak to redisguise, which, even if you did, leaves you with 0 cloak left over to try and run away, and any attempt at cloaking and juking will be cut short by 33%. And you don't need a spy main to tell you what'll happen next. If you do somehow manage to get away after missing a stab, you probably used all of your cloak to do it, meaning you are now stuck in a corner, undisguised, and without enough invisibility juice to get you safely to the nearest ammo pack. All you can do now is sit tight and pray to your deity of choice that a pyro doesn't meander around the corner while you are at your most exposed. So, after all that, you may only be left with one loadout that actually allows you to do your thing and make the most out of your Eternal Reward, but when you do make the most out of it, it does pay off. I have never gotten long kill streaks more consistently with any other knife. Seriously, just picking this thing seems to guarantee me at least 10 kills in my first life. I think it's a mixture of the silent kill and reliance on disguises and acting that gels very well with the traditional spy playstyle that I'm partial to, that allows me to succeed as much as I do when using this thing. But, as it is such a crucial factor in this knife's capabilities, and probably what turns most people off from picking the knife, we may as well talk about disguises. Believe it or not, my last SpyTalk video was actually going to be all about disguises rather than backstabs, simply because there is a lot of discussion to be had over whether disguises are actually useful in the first place. While I personally believe disguises and convincing acting is largely understated in the pub TF2 sphere, a saddening amount of people seem to hold the view that disguises are borderline useless, save for sentry guns. To see what people thought, I ran a poll on my Twitter, and although from a relatively small sample size, I was pleasantly surprised. Most people seem to think that disguises came in handy at least some of the time. However, there was a not inconsiderable number of people who did agree with the sentiment that disguises are nearly useless, and in my experience of playing TF2 and interacting with other people who played TF2 over the last 7-ish years, good god, has it really been 7 years? This more negative attitude towards disguises tends to come from people with at least decent experience in the game. So what's going on? Well, it's my belief that a lot of players are going about disguises with the wrong mindset. You can't expect to suspiciously appear in front of an enemy in a suspicious location, moving in a suspicious manner while disguised and not get called out. Disguises do not hold up under scrutiny. They are best used when the enemy's focus is not on you in the first place. When you're just in the corner of their eye and they see a vague blob that resembles their team color, and their brain subconsciously lets their guard down while they focus on pushing through a choke. Think of disguising as a sort of psychological cloaking, only instead of actual cloaking, it allows you to attack. But a disguise is not going to do all this on its own. You as a spy have to sell the part. That's right, it's time to talk about acting. And we're going to talk about it only briefly because, as I say, there's a lot of depth to this to go over, and it could be another video all on its own, but essentially, I believe there are three main factors to acting out a successful disguise: location, movement, and the finer details. Let's start with location. Say you're disguised as a sniper on 2 Fort. Now think, where are you most likely to see a sniper on 2 Fort? Are you likely to see him pushing the bridge with the front line? No, you see him standing here. Snipers always stand here. If an enemy sees you while you're disguised, one of the first things they're going to be thinking when contemplating whether you're a spy or not is whether it makes sense for you to even be where you are in the first place. If you're a scout, soldier, pyro, demo, or heavy, you're more likely to be in the front line where most of the team is. If you're a medic, you're likely to be standing a little behind the front line. If you're an engineer, you're likely to be around your buildings. If you're a sniper, you're probably far behind your team's front line. And if you're a spy, you're probably far into the enemy's backline. If you choose your disguise appropriately based on the area of the map you're disguising in, it can give that fundamental foundation to your disguise's believability. The Euroturnal reward does perfectly in this regard because whatever target you stabbed is likely to be in a common location for that class anyway, allowing you to throw yourself believably into the role of whoever you stabbed and now have donned the disguise of. The second leg of a good disguise is movement. Basically, how would your class be moving in the situation you're in if you were actually playing that class? For Scout, this means jumping around a lot, which also helps to offset the obviousness of the incorrect class walk speed. For Sniper, you're likely to be shifting side to side to avoid getting headshot. For Engineer, maybe you're crouched paternally by your sentry gun, but the main thing, which applies to whatever class you're disguised as, is to go where the action is happening, or at least look at it. Look at it, for the love of God, keep your eyes off those delicious soldiers and focus on the battlefield. Oh boy, this sure is a pickle, my fellow blue team. Stab. Because if you start eyeing up the enemy, they're immediately going to get suspicious of you. We're TF2 players, we're not used to eye contact, so if you're looking straight at us, we're gonna think you're a spy. If you're falling in line and plodding towards the front line with the rest of us, you'll draw no attention every time. Well, almost every time. The last aspect of pulling off a successful disguise are the finer details, and you really only need to bust these out if there's not much going on where you are, and you're likely to be under heavy scrutiny from the enemy's spy-hungry eyeballs. Spyballs? This includes stuff like letting out voice commands, such as yelling medic if your disguise is low on health, and switching your disguise's weapons by pressing the appropriate item slot button and then pressing B. For example, when disguised as medic, pull out the sapper and press B to have your disguise hold the medigun, as a medic commonly does. This is also useful for having your melees out on classes that make more use out of them, like spies, NGs, and demo knights. Here are some neat keybinds you can set up to switch your disguise weapon more smoothly, as well as general binds to disguise as a specific class with just the click of a button. A lot of players more expect disguised spies to be holding their primary weapon in whatever class they're disguised as. So if you have a second to switch off of this, it can make your disguise that more believable. And if you can switch items while in sight of your enemies, even better. Another finer disguise detail that hardly anyone knows about is that you can actually trigger your disguise's reload animation by reloading your revolver while disguised. If you have auto reload turned on, this can be done by firing a shot before you disguise, and then switching to and from your revolver before the reload animation has time to complete to give the illusion of your disguise reloading multiple shots. Anyone that sees you do this is pretty much bound to believe your disguise, as it's mistakenly common knowledge that disguised spies can't reload. So with all three of these factors put properly into practice, I believe disguises can actually fool people a lot more than you might think. And knowledge of how to do this properly is what unlocks the true potential of the Euroturnal reward. Remember the knife this video is about? As it is so reliant on disguises working effectively as its main gimmick. In some cases, knowing how to convincingly act can push the Eternal reward into being better than the stock knife, simply because the disguise on kill can place you into such believable locations, giving you an immediate advantage over the stock knife when you're trying to fool people, i.e. all of the time. In all honesty, I think the largest thing turning people off about this knife, as it was before the Jungle Inferno changes, is the inability to disguise freely. Which, as I say, is strange because a lot of people seem to think disguising doesn't really matter anyways. So it's kind of tragic that Valve, in an attempt to make the knife be more used, added a downside that makes the knife arguably more punishing than it was before the rework, in exchange for a conceptually conflicting disguise mechanic that, along with the cloak drain, did not help to boost the weapon's popularity in the slightest. So how do we fix the Eurotunnel reward and boost it higher into viability? Well, I could make a few suggestions like the one I made earlier about making the quote-unquote silent kill actually silent. I also think the cloak drain thing could just be wiped completely. It really butts heads with both the concept of needing cloak to disguise, as well as any kind of loadout variety the spy could have with the weapon. Maybe instead of consuming a full cloak meter, disguising could only take 50% of your cloak, leaving you with a little bit of wiggle room instead of having to wait for a full recharge. Any combination of these suggestions would probably make the knife better, but if I'm really being honest with myself, I kind of just want the old Eurotunnel reward back. I've had a long and strange history with this weapon, from loving it to thinking it's useless to loving it again. I think some part of me has always confided in the smug belief that this knife holds more power than the community gives it credit for. And even back before the Jungle Inferno rework, the knife was one of my favourites simply because of how different it made the experience of playing Spy, a class that doesn't have a huge amount of playstyle variety. I guess some part of me is still just kind of salty that Valve took a unique risk-reward concept and sort of mellowed it out to fit in line with the rest of Spy's knives by essentially making the old disguise exploit a mechanical function of the weapon itself. I know reverting the changes made in Jungle Inferno won't bump the knife back into regular usage alongside the other knives, but I'm sort of fine with that. I like having this underrated little Aladdin reference in my back pocket to use that people often don't expect to be effective, although it might become slightly less underrated now that I've made a video talking about how much I love it for 20 minutes. I've actually seen somewhat of a renaissance of people talking about this thing in the TF-Tuber sphere, which warms my heart a little, even if it's not all compliments. Whether this buzz carries over to the knife's usage in-game, I have no idea, but I will make it my personal white whale to bump this knife's popularity back up to where I believe it should be. About here, I reckon. For as long as this script ended up being, there are still so many little tricks and personal anecdotes that I could spew off about this knife. The amount of value I get from every single stab still surprises me. But I'll leave you to explore and create your own opinionated journey like I did. What do you think about this knife? I want to know. No one's talking about it anymore. So go, play with it and let me know your thoughts. It may be the case that it just doesn't fit the way you play Spy, or that it's just a bad weapon because it still kind of is. But like me, you can feel like a cool kid for using what I consider to be Spy's most underrated knife. If you'd like to support future production of the stuff that I make, really all you need to do is keep watching, but if you feel like going out of your way to show your appreciation, you can head on over to patreon.com/HintShot, where I will be posting every video I make a day early to those subscribed to the genuine tier or above. You'll also get to have your name read out alongside Mega and Mr. Sir DBA, whom I owe enormous gratitude for their generosity. And of course, there's always my Discord server, which doesn't require picking your pocket to join, and is probably what you'd consider my main social media outlet at this point. It's where I'm hanging most frequently, so if you feel like having a chat or asking questions to me or other supporters of the channel, the links to both my Discord and my Patreon will be in the description. As for right now, I suppose there's nothing else to say apart from thank you for your continued support, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheerio!